May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, friends, I want to begin with a question this morning, as I often like to do. But do you remember a time or times in your life where you had a sudden shift in perspective? Where you thought one thing was happening, and then all of a sudden you realized that something completely different was happening. Can you think of a time in your life? Well, I'm sure I've shared this story with you before, but I'll never forget a conversation I had years ago with a fellow seminarian about her former career as a headhunter, someone who professionally researches and identifies suitable candidates for employment. But here's the thing, because English isn't my first language, I thought a headhunter was a bounty hunter. And so here I am talking to this petite woman in her mid-50s, and I'm trying to wrap my mind around this thing that she's telling me. And so you can just imagine how progressively awkward and confusing this conversation got. So she's talking about headhunter, I'm thinking bounty hunter. So I'm like, so wait, you were a headhunter? And she goes, yep. And I'm like, I never imagined that women could do something like that. Oh, why not? Well, it's like the people that you're going after. She's like, yeah, but if you really distinguish yourself, then you've got to expect that someone's going to target you at some point. And so it doesn't really matter who that is. I'm like, doesn't matter. Aren't you afraid that someday you're going to catch someone on a bad day and not afraid of what might happen to you? And so the conversation just kind of went on like this for about a minute or two until finally I'm so incredibly intrigued by what this woman did with her past life. I'd never met a headhunter before. That I literally say this to her. I go, so okay, tell me everything. Like, what kind of weapons did you use? Did you have like a dog? Were you like kicking down doors and saying, you're coming with me? And it was at that point where she stops me. She goes, hold on a second. What do you think a headhunter is? Perspective. It's amazing how two people can be looking at the same thing or even using the same language to talk about something and yet have two completely different and sometimes even opposing perspective on what's happening. No two people see the world the exact same way. I think we know this. It's an understatement. Whether it's because of your upbringing or your education or your experience or your socioeconomic background, your gender, your age, your sexuality, the color of your skin, whether you're a part of the dominant culture or not, whether it's because of your religion or your past trauma or your fear or your unmet needs or your role models in life, or your health condition, or your family relationships, or your biological makeup. No two people have the exact same lenses and same perspective in life. And this can be a real gift when you have a chance to learn from others and understand perspectives that are different than yours. It can be a real gift when different viewpoints are celebrated and come together to create a fuller picture. It can also be annoying at times, right? Or frustrating or confounding how someone else can have such a different perspective than you do. Have you ever thought to yourself, life would be so much easier if so-and-so just didn't have their own brain, right? It would just be so much easier. Differing perspectives. Not only is this the linchpin to a society's health and success, it's also the heart of conflict. People seeing and interpreting things differently. So perspective is a really powerful thing. Perspective, as we all know, informs our judgments. And judgment informs action, and action shapes reality. So this is why I believe Jesus worked really hard to shift perspectives, not just to talk about actions, but to actually shift the perspectives which lead ultimately to action. And this is why I hope as we take a closer look at the gospel story this morning, that we'll see that we're being invited to consider how we're going to let Jesus' teachings also shift and shape our own perspectives. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So we're going to do something very different this morning. And I'm really going to just lean into this opportunity that we have Zoom. Unfortunately, those of you who are joining us via YouTube live stream, you'll be able to observe this, but not necessarily participate in it. But I'm going to invite you to actually join me in some perspective taking on this particular story. But first, the story. Jesus is walking along in Galilee, up where he did most of his ministry, and he comes across this booth where a tax collector named Matthew is sitting. And Jesus says to him, "Matthew, I want you to follow me." So Matthew gets up and invites Jesus to his home and throws a party for him. And all of Matthew's, in the story, it says tax collectors and sinners, all these other tax collectors and people whom the community looks at questionably join, and Jesus and the disciples are now having dinner with them. And so the Pharisees come up, and the Pharisees say to the disciples, "What is your master doing? What's Jesus doing?" And so the disciples are a little confounded. They're not really sure how to answer the question. And so Jesus overhears, and he responds, and he says, "Those who are well have no need for a physician, but those who are sick." And then he says, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice." Now, one thing that is absolutely contextually true about this story is that it is socially, religiously, and politically charged. This story is so charged. What Jesus is doing here is extremely controversial. And there are multiple perspectives and opinions in the story on what Jesus is doing. There's the perspective of the Pharisees. There's the perspective of the general public and what they think and how they feel about what Jesus is doing. There's the perspective of Jesus' disciples. There's Matthew's perspective. There's the perspective of the tax collectors and sinners. And then there's the perspective of Jesus. And lastly, there's our perspective as the readers. And none of these perspectives are exactly the same. And so what I want to do is, and this is a really powerful way to dig into a passage of Scripture, is to actually assume the perspective of each of these different people or groups of people in the story. And this is where I need you. So what I want to do is just give a little bit of context to help us. And then I'm just ask you to raise your hand if you're willing to, for a moment, just take the perspective of Matthew. I will click on the unmute button for you. It will send you a signal that says the host has invited you to unmute your microphone. And then you just, you unclick on that, and then you can answer the question that I asked you. So first, a little context. What we know about tax collectors is they were Jews. So they're collecting taxes from their fellow Jewish people in the Galilee area or in Palestine. And they are working on behalf of the Roman occupier. So the other thing we know about tax collectors is because they had the backing of the oppressor, they could actually line their own pockets by taking more money from people. And so they're already not respected. They did not have good standing in the community, and so they had nothing to lose. They would just go out. They lived wealthy lives, and they did it on the backs of their own community. And so so that's the first context I want to give us. So I want someone to take over. Just tell me what, if you were a part of the general public and you were to see Jesus, call Matthew and then go to his home and eat with him, how would you feel about that? So I can't see everyone on my screen, but if someone raises your hand, I'll see if I can name or call on someone. I need you to take the perspective of the general public. How would you be feeling if you were in the community? Raise your hand. Not everyone all at once, please. Okay, great. Sally, I'm unmuting you, Sally. Go ahead and unmute. Okay, there you go.
Somebody's got to do this job.
Somebody's got to do this job. Okay, thank you, Sally. I'll unmute you back. Someone else? Raise your hand. Okay, Lee. Go ahead and unmute yourself. I've requested that. There you go.
I think as a member of the general public, I would feel betrayed and angry that Jesus would want to hang out with people who oppress his own people.
Thank you, Lee. Let's get one or two other people. General public. Want to raise your hand? A lot of people, I can't see their screens. So, okay, go ahead, Roxy. Unmute yourself, though.
I think confusion comes to my mind because I don't know who Jesus is yet. He's been an unknown, and here he is engaging in this behavior, and I don't know why, and I might feel threatened and confused.
Definitely if he's going and hanging out with a tax collector. Thank you. Okay, great. So there's a lot of people who don't have their screens on, but you can use the raise your hand function and it'll alert me that you've raised your hand. All right, so great. So thanks for the general public. Now, let me give us a little bit of a context for the Pharisees, and then we're going to take their perspective. So the Pharisees were really devout religious people. They're not mean people. We kind of often make them out to be heartless individuals. No, they're actually, they were extremely philanthropic. They believed in the scriptures. They were good people that cared a lot about the integrity of the faith and integrity of their religion. And so in Jewish religious law, it says a lot about not associating with people whose moral character is questionable, because that tarnishes your own spirituality and your own approachability to God. And so they were extremely strict when it comes to whose hand you shake, whose home you go into. So these are the Pharisees who are now questioning Jesus. So let's take their perspective for a moment. Who'd like to be the first to do that? I'm gonna start calling on people if I don't see your hands up. So yes, I'm gonna be that guy. All right, raise your hand. Let's see. Okay, Nancy Durr, I'm unmuting you. Here we go.
Okay, I would say that they're just straightforward unclean, the tax collectors, because they're using the money, they're involved in graft, and thus they're not good Jews.
Thank you. So how would you feel about Jesus doing this?
I would, I guess I would want to hear, you know, is he going there to try to reform the tax collector? Does he have, what is his purpose?
Thank you, Nancy. Can I get one or two more people? This is a really powerful way to enter into the story. Roz, I see your hand. I'm unmuting you. I was going to request it, so you'll have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay. I've had the impression, I read somewhere, that of the various sects of Judaism, Jesus was actually closer to the Pharisees than many others. So that one perspective here would be that it was the Pharisees saying, hey, what are you doing, brother? To one that they considered to be not quite their own, but at least related. And Jesus' perspective, of course, would be that, as he says, it's the sixth needed position.
Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing a bunch of hands pop up here. Okay, let's go to, I'm going to go to Julia Andrews. I'm unmuting you, or you'll have to unmute yourself there. Julia? Oh, sorry, I can't hear you because you have to actually click on unmute on your, there you go.
I would be really worried that this man was leading people in my community astray.
That's a big deal, especially if you tried to hold things together and keep everyone in line. Thank you. Okay, one more. Francis Lee, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
The Pharisees were probably suspicious of this interloper to begin with. Who is he? What is he preaching? Is he a threat to our primacy? And now here he's doing this really weird thing. And what is he trying to prove?
Great, thank you. Okay, wonderful. So the next group we're going to look at, and I see, let's see, Bill Kennedy, I saw your hand up, but I can't find you again. So raise your hand again, and I'll get you on there. The other one is the disciples. So Jesus The disciples are a part of the community. They've passed Matthew a million times. Matthew's collected money from the disciples themselves. And here they are, they've committed their lives to Jesus. And now they are with Jesus going to the home of Matthew. So they've watched Jesus walk up to Matthew and ask him to become one of them. How do they feel about this? What's their perspective? Bill Kennedy, go ahead.
I've got to think that the disciples, as well as members of the community, are perhaps feeling a sense of betrayal. I mean, Jesus was one of us. Jesus was here for us, both the smaller group of the disciples and the wider group of the community. And now he's, so to speak, consorting with the enemy. You know, has he sold out? Has he become part of the establishment?
Thank you, Bill. Go ahead and mute yourself. Thank you so much. I'm gonna get a couple of more hands up. Who'd like to take the perspective of the disciples? Okay, Dawn, you'll have to unmute yourself. I just sent you a request. Go ahead.
As a disciple, I am so scared because Jesus is forcing me to interact with someone who is totally different from me, has a totally different perspective, different way of life. I don't trust him whatsoever.
Thank you, Dawn. One other person on the disciples. This is the one I really feel personally. So let me just ask one more person to share. Okay, go ahead, Krista. You'll have to unmute yourself there.
Yeah.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I think the disciples, if I were a disciple, I would be very uncomfortable, and I would hope that this was just a one-time thing, and that we would be, out very quickly. It'll be a fast meal and we'd be out of there, because these are people, nobody likes them. They're considered unclean, and hopefully Jesus maybe had one too many drinks or something, and that's this is a one-time thing.
At least that would be an easy thing to say to the community. Look, he just had a little too much to drink. Don't worry, he won't do that again. Can you imagine also the heat that you would get by association in your own community? I mean, you're, as a disciple following Jesus, you've become a semi-public figure. And just think of the scrutiny. Now, it's not just Jesus. Now, you were there as well. I wonder if anybody put up an argument with Jesus about that. All right. Now, let's kind of switch gears a little bit. I'd like to just, you guys know what tax collectors do. We talked about it. Who wants to take the perspective of Matthew? And we'll just say Matthew and the tax collectors so that this doesn't take forever. So Matthew, who wants to take, go ahead and raise your hand. How would you feel if you were Matthew in this story? You see Jesus walking up to you, and he comes up and he says, Matthew, I'd like for you to become one of my disciples. Okay, I see some hands raised. Julia and Andrew, Julia and Francis, unless you guys want to answer again, put your hand down, but I may have to come back to you unless nobody else goes. Veronica, do you want to go? I see your face. There you go. Okay, 1 second. Let me, sorry. Go ahead and unmute yourself again. There you go. Go ahead.
Yeah, I get the sense that he just wants to say, if you want me, this is all of me. This is my whole self. And if you want me, this is who I am. And almost a confrontational way of saying, this is who I am.
Thank you. And it's already all out there, right? So it's not like he even has an image to protect, because it's known to everyone. Thank you. Who else would like to take Matthew's perspective? Okay, Betsy. Sorry, let me unmute you again. Go ahead. There you go.
So I think, can you hear me?
Yep.
So I think I would be trying really hard not to make eye contact with Jesus. If somebody's, accosting me on the street and I'm trying to do my job, and this guy with his followers, like, hey, I got a life. I'm good the way I am, just keep walking.
Thank you, Betsy. The one interesting thing about that is if that was a conflict that he had, something overcame it, because we're told that he actually ended up getting up and following him. So he left it all, became a disciple. Let's go to Earl. You'll have to go ahead.
Sari, I would think it would be pure gratitude. As a tax collector, he was not permitted to go to the synagogue. Leviticus says tax collectors, robbers, and murderers are the worst. He had been excluded from the community. He and all tax collectors, the Jewish community. And here's this Jew asking him, not even going beyond speaking to him, asking him to follow, to join, to be part of it. What a radiant experience it must have been to hear those words.
Thank you, Earl. Wonderful. I wish we could spend a lot more time. I mean, every one of these different perspectives that you're bringing into this from your own kind of thinking, your own feelings, your own past are really powerful. And so then there's Jesus's perspective in this. And I'm going to just share with us what I think is going on here, and then we'll conclude. Jesus's perspective, Jesus says when he's asked about this, he's actually asked, what are you doing? And so he's sharing his perspective. He says, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. So I think this is really interesting that Jesus is approaching this situation, seeing himself as a physician. I think this is really important. And let's just dig into it for a second. So what is a physician's primary purpose? It's to facilitate healing. And so where do we tend to find Jesus in his life and his ministry? When you think of it this way, Jesus viewing himself as a physician. Where do we find him spending the majority of his time? So whereas the community might be interpreting his actions through the lens of religious purity laws or through social norms or political affiliations, Jesus's lens is actually very different. He's interpreting and viewing life around him through a different lens. He's asking the question, where is there brokenness? Not what are the social norms? Who should I be interacting with? What are the religious purity laws? No, he's saying, where is there brokenness? Where is there vulnerability? Who's oppressed? Who is on the bottom? Who's overlooked? Who is without an advocate? Isn't that so interesting? You just think about our own lenses, the way we view things, our own opinions. For Jesus, this seems to consistently be his lens. I've come so that you may have life. This idea of a physician, and that you may have life abundantly. So where is life being choked out? That's where I want to be, to give life. Who is being denied life? Years ago, when Benedict was still the Pope in Rome, I heard an interview over just a radio interview with a devout Catholic woman who was being interviewed about a kind of an edict that Pope Benedict had just put out. And it was a controversial one. And so at one point in the interview, the interviewer asks this lady, says, okay, so the Pope is the icon in the Catholic faith. And I just want to ask you, what is your reaction to the Pope's words and his decisions? And this woman thinks for a moment. I thought this was so funny. She thinks for a moment, this devout Catholic woman, and she goes, well, I think the Pope's entitled to his own opinion. And there was just something so striking about that for me. I expected her to say something so different, with this like, well, it's the Pope. And so, we're going to learn eventually, come to see the things the way his enlightened self sees them. But no, the Pope is entitled to his own opinion. And the reason I share this with you is because the reason I like this story is because I personally really value honoring my core convictions. And I'm sure that many of you feel like this as well. None of us like to feel like robots, or that someone says something and then, look, regardless of what we feel or think, we just have to go along with it. That I value being a thinking person. I value being someone who actively engages in the world and the things that I read, and applying my lens and experience and my education and my faith to what it is that I'm hearing. And this is one of the beautiful parts about being an Episcopalian. There are a lot of people who feel like they have to turn their brains off when they go into church. Otherwise, they're just going to feel like they're offended over and over again. And no, in the Episcopal Church, we invite you to bring your whole self. This is what the most beautiful part is of what we do. So those who agree with my sermons and disagree with my sermons, you're welcome just the way you are. Please never turn your brain off just because the pastor is saying that. I don't think I'm at any risk of you elevating me to a place where it's like speaking ex cathedra. But I'm just saying the church is a safe place where we can do that. That's what I value. However, and this is the big important thing, discipleship, and we get a clear sense from Scripture, demands a shift in our perspectives. So it's one thing to say, well, Jesus, you're entitled to your opinion. I just see the world very differently. And then there's discipleship that says, I really do believe that there's something here that even if I don't see it or I don't understand it, it's something worth staying very open to and something to look deeper into and to move toward. That's what discipleship is. It demands a shift in our perspective. So like for Matthew, and every one of those people in the story, almost everyone had a shift in perspective. I don't know if the Pharisees did, and we don't know how the local community felt. But for Matthew, I can imagine the shift in perspective for him. Just think of this. My past is not a measure of my acceptability to God. What an incredible shift in perspective. Or like for the disciples, this shift in perspective, wow, all are truly welcome. Jesus isn't just saying that. All are welcome. And so what I want to invite us to and leave us with today is the words that Jesus speaks to the Pharisees today. It's a very invitational thing. He says to them, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And in this way, he's bringing them back to the lens through which he sees the world. Where is their brokenness? Where is their vulnerability? Who are the oppressed? Who is without an advocate? And I don't know where this message meets you today, how it touches you in your own life, in your own relationships, or nationally. But I invite us to think about discipleship through this particular lens of a perspective shift. So that it's not just, I come to church and I just listen to the teachings of Jesus and I say, well, Jesus is entitled to his opinion. But I actually am letting Jesus's perspective seep into my own life and start to affect the ways that I see the world. God bless you, St. John's. Thank you for doing the hard work of faith and life. Amen.